Hey, what's up, guys? It's Dion Brown. You are listening and or watching Man versus Brand. So I have the honor of giving you this podcast with Keaton-Woods. She runs the Tea Hive, and you'll learn more about what the Tea Hive does in this podcast. But first and foremost, I kind of want to hit you guys with a little bit of a topic that feels relevant and timely right now for me. So recently, I saw a poll and research that suggests that a lot of adults were, in fact, artistic geniuses when they were younger. So, what this poll and research said was that folks who would create art in the preschool to elementary stage, oftentimes by leaps and bounds, would no longer have access to that skill set in their adult lives. And so, to me, that poses a question. What happened to us? What happens to us that creates this gap between our free form, free thinking, free creative selves and the version of us that can't draw a stick figure for the life? Right? Like what's going on? Like, what is it? Life? Is it the journey? Is it self-discovery? What goes on with us that doesn't allow us to actually produce the type of art that is synonymous with? And let me give you guys a preface. So, to be considered genius, you are producing art that is on par with Monet, Basquiat, Picasso, the greats, right? The folks. Okay, you're not doing Kehinde Wiley, because in preschool you're not coloring, you're not drawing at that level. But this sense of the abstract, this sense of creation, that children typically have the ability to produce, a lot of folks are producing at that age, at that level. And then following them into their adulthood, we see that as they enter their 20s, 30s, and 40s, that they actually don't have the ability to see the world in the raw, creative way that they used to. Now, does that mean that as adults we're not still creating art? No. We're still creating art, and we're creating different art. You know what I mean? You can go from producing Manets and Renoirs in preschool to being a blockbuster director or actor. You could then be writing plays and be a playwright, or you could be producing art and still be making it in a way that suggests that you are still creative and commercially viable, but maybe not in that genius way that you had it when you were 5. So I want to talk to T. Keaton-Woods about what's happening to us. What's the phenomenon? What's she seeing out in the creative world? Because she is in fellowship, in conversation, in community, and specifically coaching creatives at the highest level. So what's going on with us? What's happening? And how can we possibly access that part of ourselves that is inherently artistic, inherently genius? So let me introduce you guys to T. Keaton-Woods. T, why don't you say hello to the audience?
Hello, everyone. So excited to be here.
Absolutely. So talk to me about your own journey. Like, what was your artistic journey that got you from childhood to coaching creatives as you do today?
So as a little girl, I definitely did ballet, and acted and all that fun stuff and modeled. I was a pageant kid. So, I was quite exposed to all that in all the lessons. And most of that didn't stick with me. Dance is the sort of the thing that I stayed with the longest. And then like cheerleading and all that. So I had access to the arts, and every Saturday when I was little, my mom had me at the art center, and multiple days in the afternoons, I was going to like all different kinds of lessons. And so I love that you brought this up because this is one of my favorite things to talk about. Um, oh, so many things. There's like 9 million thoughts flowing in my head right now. I'm just like, I want to ask you a question. Like, my question for you is, Dion, like, when did you like see your artistic life shift?
So for me, I think art has always been a part of my life. Like creativity has always been a part of my life. And I think that as I matured, I found that my efforts were directed in specific spaces. So when I was younger, it was about writing. I wanted to write. I wanted to express myself. I wanted to create comic books. I was just doing that type of stuff. Entered into high school, and I was like the guy who was doing spoken word competitions. I was writing poetry. I was in AP English, AP History. I just loved the art of it all. When I got to college, I started doing like art history, thinking that that was going to be my way. But I found that um, that's when society sort of kicked in. I sort of felt disconnected to just experiencing European art. Like I didn't really see me in much of the art, and therefore I became disconnected with the art. Now, that's art as a visual medium. Like I was then at that point introduced to like the James Baldwins of the world, the Langston Hughes of the world, the Nora Hurst. Wait, am I saying that right? Yeah,
Zora
Nora.
Neale.
Go, please.
Zora Neale Hurston, yeah.
Yes, thank you, Jesus Christ, because I was definitely gonna mess that up. So Zora Neale Hurston, jeez, right? Yes, okay. Um, so that's when I kind of entered that phase. However, I was also kind of reading like Joseph Conrad. I was reading a lot of like interesting sort of contemporary and or past authors that had like the largest influence, right? So I was reading a lot of stuff that was related to like feminism. I was reading a lot of stuff that was related to like classism, while I was simultaneously being experienced and being led to works that sort of pushed against all of that, right? That said, we're not included in this hierarchy. Therefore, we're going to write pieces that sort of push against that. Once I kind of made it into adulthood, I think that that's when art became a big thing for me. So, like a lot of folks, I was introduced to Basquiat, Warhol, Herring, and through them, I think I got this sense that there was something about art that was very accessible on a street level, that didn't have to be highbrow, that didn't really come from a particular school of thought. That was very much just that. I was also introduced to philosophy, which I think is a form of art in the way that it's presented, in the way that thought and conjecture is very much not concrete, but very much just sort of in the cerebral. It's a mix of abstract entering into like logical thought. Then I became an adult, and all that didn't matter because I was like, I'm going to be a marketing director. I'm going to be a brand manager, right? Because all of those things led me to understanding the world, but then I had to create an actual job from it, right? And being a poet for me wasn't a job. Being a playwright was nice, but didn't feel like I had the connections for it. Um, and so I chose a space where I could possibly create art and manage art, but do it in a commercial way that would allow me to have money, right? Because at some point you kind of need it, but also um, put my stamp on projects that would be viewed regionally, nationally, globally. And so I did that, and a lot of that was focused on data. And so as I like grew in my craft, the art of it became less important and the data of it became more important. And so I inherently felt that I became less artistic. Now we're at potting and all that great stuff. And now I'm back in the artistic sort of space and having great conversations with people like you. And that's my journey.
Okay, so you answered your own question in describing your journey.
Okay.
So, what happens to the geniuses? It's the moment when your external environment becomes more real than the internal environment. Genius is an authentic creative spark that can only live in one's own personal experience. And as soon as we get past about 7 and we have enough of the external programming and enough of the starving artist XYZ, right? All those characters you were thinking up as a child when you were writing, all those ways. And then, like, we saw the trajectory of it. Like, you were doing this all the way through high school into college, right? And but the closer you got to adulthood and freedom, the less free you became to create.
And it's kind of scary, right? Because then there becomes a question of how many people are out there that have so much to offer, to deliver, to free thought, free creativity, to producing works that would be viable and interesting, that aren't. And now I kind of want to give you a framework, T,
Mm,
because I think that specifically with people of color, I think
mm,
that so many folks that would be poets, that would be authors in a traditional sense, become songwriters and rappers and singer songwriters because that tends to be the most commercially viable thing. And I also think that those folks, regardless of the success of them, right? So you could be doing this in a coffee shop or doing this on a grand stage, are kind of pigeonholed to one form. And we know that creatives tend to be multidisciplined. Like, I paint and write. I create poetry and write plays. I dance and I act. And so often we just want people to be the one thing that they're known for, the one thing that is consumable by us. So my question is how do we get back to that space, right? How do we find ourselves in the right emotional, mental, spiritual, intellectual space where
mm.
um we're not our own barriers, we're not our own obstacles, and we're allowing ourselves to create in the way that we did when we didn't have these social cues, when we didn't have this expectation, when artistry wasn't about starving, it was about creating. So how do we get back there?
Well, I mean, you're bringing up two huge things, right? Because, like, being that kind of artist requires a certain level of vulnerability and authenticity. True authenticity requires vulnerability, but how are you able to be vulnerable if you're not safe? So socioeconomics, yeah, systemic barriers, yeah, colonialism, all the things. Like, so all the things that we talk about, especially for people of color, and people who are living in poverty, how do they have the freedom to create, right? Because to be a genius level artist, you either have to be so detached from the mainstream that you don't care about the appearing a certain way and being in a certain socioeconomic thing, and like you live in a loft that doesn't have running water and you're not fussed, like, right, and you get on with it. All of us who, like, especially I was in theater for a long time, so all of us like who have been in those worlds get to hear like the stories of the old guys like talking about living in New York in the 70s in a non-sanctioned building and repacking districts, and like, you're like, okay, but that doesn't sound like great. No, it's the best time of my life. You kids like don't know. We had the freedom to like make something. And that would like stick with me. When I was like 21 and 22 years old, like I would I was getting to work with all these amazing like actors who were also like painters and songwriters, and they did all the things, right? Like you said, they were multidisciplinary, doing all the things, and they would always be like, be freer, T. Like, don't worry about it so much. And I was like, spreadsheets, budget. How are we going to afford the things? And so, I mean, to try to answer your question, part of it is like safety and security. Like, if people knew they were like safe, that genius has space, right? To thrive and to be real. And I was recently speaking with someone who's a somatic practitioner who said that there's being research done about the fact that if you're living through trauma, you can't be curious.
Okay, so let's pause on that because I was actually gonna bring that up because so many artists are creating in spaces of trauma, right? So when you talk about safety, it almost goes as a contradiction to what we typically understand about artistry, right? We think that artists should be tortured, they should be isolated, there's self-harm, right? Whether it's cutting off your ear or doing drugs or drinking too much or being in toxic relationships, right? So much of what we know about artistry, and not just in a contemporary sense, but in a historical sense, has been kind of associated with trauma. Like the best of the best experience tons of trauma in order to get there. So how do we change that paradigm? Or is that true? Like, or are we just highlighting the ones that are the outliers, the ones that have the best sort of stories to share, right? The earless ones, the heroine for 5 nights and created an amazing piece of art ones. And we're not really looking at the median experience, which is a lot of folks produce their best work when they're in a safe space.
So let's talk about containers. So yeah, so like all those people like without the container, right? So if you don't have a container that says you are able to be successful, you win the lottery and you blow all that money, right? So you have the one hit wonder, you're tortured, you're cutting off your ear because you're now trying to produce, create, not from your authentic spark, but from to live up to a persona.
Okay, I see
So,
that.
so many of those artists, I mean, like the Monets and the Van Goghs and all of that stuff started to get bad.
Yeah.
Like it didn't stay great because the further they got away and the further it was diluted throughout the school of the time in which they were operating, the less potent their spark was in the work. And so
So
it's because, yeah,
wait,
go
so
ahead.
hold on, because I think there's something interesting here, right?
Yeah.
So then there's an argument that
Mm.
that the ones that we know the most of, we were maybe introduced at a time where they were producing their less potent works, but they were doing things to get attention, to be provocative, maybe not to the public, but to themselves, right? Like maybe they weren't doing it for everyone, but in order to produce, in order to create, they were doing more stuff because those are the stories that we typically hear. The ones that were producing great art from, you know, childhood through adulthood, we tend to kind of breeze over them in terms of history. It's the ones that seem most problematic, that seem most traumatic, that seem most scarred, that history tends to look fondly on.
Like nobody wants to talk about a, successful Disney kid, right? Like we as a like in the culture that is messy is
Yeah.
entertaining. Messy kind of makes us feel better, right? So by them living their mess out loud and proud and basically getting to that, what is that? Like it's that otherworldly non-people status. They're a thing. They're a product. They're not we dehumanize them.
Mhm.
Yeah, like I would think I would go mad too. I think anybody would go mad once one's humanity is taken away from you because the thing you do, the way you express yourself becomes someone outside of you has decided that is your identity.
And I think
Like,
that there's an element too of like an echo chamber, right?
mm,
Like at some point, you become so successful in your art and your creativity that everyone around you is agreeing to your behavior, your thoughts, your instincts, and those may actually be working against you in a non-biased, objective sense, right? And so, in a way, if everyone around you is kind of living off of your creativity, living off of your art, and this is, I think, not just true of traditional artists. It could be true of CEOs. It could be true of almost anyone. Like when you're surrounding yourself with people whose lives are dependent upon your success, but not just your success, your satisfaction with them, right?
mm,
That
mm.
that they then just reflect to you what you want to hear in order for them to maintain the position that they occupy. And therefore, if you're like, I'm going to do this really toxic thing, they're like, do it. Because if they were saying don't do it, then they put themselves at risk for something for an uncomfort that they're not interested in experiencing. Which,
Yeah, I think the self-preservation aspect, right? I mean, I always come back to a lot of time like, what's your voice? Where are your values? What's your voice? Right? And that's not stuff we talk about. Like, what school, what church, what institution is being like, hey, let's get in touch with our values and then like claim our voice before we like go out and like say something in public. That's what I care about. Like, that's power. That's like a real power, right? Like, I know myself. So, like, we live in a world that is very me, 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 but not in a world that's like very I am and I know, especially when speaking about the self. So people become grasping and like this. And so that's how like you have like yes people like amen chorusing all the wrong bad decisions. Um and not really holding space to say and reflecting back to someone like what's real and what they're really showing, but like a sort of washed over patinaed version of what they're really kicking out. And that's scary to me, because I think artists and creatives are the most important people in the world. People get really upset when I say this, but I don't want to learn about the world from the history book. I want to learn about the world from the lens of the people who lived in that time. And that's their songs, that's their written word, that's their paintings, that's their books, right? That's life. Like,
So wait, to kind of get back to this kind of echo chamber conversation, right? I
mhm,
think that that sounds like maybe the Kanye West of the world, right? That's in this kind of thing that reverberates everything that they are thinking and saying, and therefore they become extreme in their ideals. But that could also be your partner, your boss,
mm,
your friends are who are echoing your questions around life and professional choices. So you're like, hey, I want to get more creative, but like, I don't really know if I'm going to make a lot of money at it. And they're like, but you need money because that's going to be important to you. And you're like, yes. And so they're reflecting to you the things that they believe will be important to your life, important to your success, right? But ultimately, they may not be challenging you to access that part of you that is raw and creative, that was producing genius works at 7, right? Like, because they don't want you to fail, and they hear you for your questions, your insecurities around it, and that can produce its own echo chamber, that isn't just about who's prospering from you or who's being paid from you, but just who's invested in your life. So regular folks could be stuck in their own echo chambers and not really know it.
100%. Like, oh, like generational trauma. Here we go. Um, um, the number of people who get to 30, 40, 50, 60 and are like, oh my gosh, I'm not the place I wanted to be. Oh my gosh, like I've lived this whole life that, and all I wanted to do when I was 7 is really what I wanted to do. And I
Yep.
never did it because I took on my parents, my grandparents, my cousins, my uncles, my third grade teachers' fear of what they hadn't done and what they couldn't do. And so that, I think, is really what you were just sort of speaking to, that like echo chamber of like the power in disbelief and the power of fear. And when we're operating from like I don't know what's out there. Oh my gosh, it's dark and scary out there. And I always go, well, that's fine if you don't want to change anything. Like if you don't want to change anything, sweet. But if you're dissatisfied and you want to change something, it can only happen when you like walk far enough in the room to find the light switch.
So
Which is,
so talk to me about coaching folks that um have created to a level that they have now expectation, but that also fear the repercussion of not being great enough, right? Or not living up to that initial work or that initial concept, right? Like,
yep.
how are you helping them to work through those fears, that echo chamber, that sort of power of disbelief, that generational trauma? How are you helping them to work through that in order to get them to the other side where their genius actually lies?
The first thing I always say when I see a client spinning in that way is I go, okay, let's take a breath together. And then I go, up until recently, I was like, there's almost 8 billion people, but now I can say we have now passed 8 billion people on the planet. Not everybody wants to be a songwriter, right? Or an actor or a writer, whatever their thing is. There's enough people for you to have fans. even if you change gears and do something different. There's
Wow.
enough people. So let's
So
worry about your voice first.
so then in a way, does that become a marketing machine question, or is that a creative find your voice, follow your path question? Like what, because both are sort of necessary, right? So
Hmm.
change gears, you may need to find more of an audience that resonates with that, which is more of a marketing thing. But also you need to refine that thing so that you're articulating it in a way that it is um, resonating with a set of individuals to move the needle in a way that allows for you to continue your career. So, which is it both? Is it an and or? Is it if not? I don't know. What's that conversation like?
That conversation is one of my favorite sayings, and everyone who knows me gets this at some point in their life. And I say it into myself in the mirror all the time: not your work. Some things are not your work because they are not in your zone of genius. Marketing, I've done some marketing. I am a great personal brander. It's a workshop that I do quite often. Da 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 da. But I'm excellent, but it's not my zone of genius.
Got it.
So the thing is sometimes things are not your work. So if you're an artist and you're trying to get that next album out, you're going to get pushback, right? Like if you're on a label, they may have notes, they're going to push back. So don't water yourself down. I want you to go to 15 and then we'll get the 10 that we're after, but you stand. And sometimes that standing and that rooting is the thing that brought people to you in the first place. So then when you start denying that in order to stay there, you're like, why'd they leave me? And it's like, well, you didn't incite them anymore. They came to you because you were rooted, and now you've moved to the front of the stage instead of standing back in the place where you were. And then we let the marketers and the packagers and the focus groupers let them do their genius zone stuff. Because
Yep.
there's people who love that and are geniuses at that. But as the artist, that's not your work. And that's okay.
So if I'm listening right now or watching this right now, and I'm thinking to myself, man, I've spent 20 years. We're not going to count the first 10. So I'm 30, right? I spent
Yeah.
first 10 just kind of, muffling around. Since the last 20 years, um, headed in the wrong direction.
Mhm.
I think there is something creative I have to share. There is something that I want to impart on the world. But I'm in operations, right? I'm doing this work. I'm a personal assistant. I'm a customer service rep, right? Like, how do I create space and grace? Space and grace, right? Because you need a little bit of both. You need a little
Yeah.
space to do it in your schedule, but you also need a little grace to refine and hone that skill set that's possibly been abandoned for a while, right? How do we find the space and grace to allow ourselves to re-enter our creative zone and produce in a way that makes us happy and feel fulfilled and satisfied?
Yeah. So this is so funny. This has been coming up a lot lately. I need to this is the third time someone's asked me almost this identical question in the last 3 days. So the first thing would say is close your eyes for me. And I would say, imagine if you're
Okay, I'm doing this right now. I'm doing this, guys.
great. Let's do it. All right.
Close
Hang
my
on. Close your eyes. Take a breath with me. It's your 75th birthday.
Jesus. Okay.
They're 70.
My knees hurt. My knees all of a sudden started hurting. Okay, go.
Yes. And you have received visitors and awards and cards and love and all of these things. And you're sitting in your favorite chair, and all the people who mattered and all the accomplishments and ways you've impacted life are present for you in through these cards and these gifts you're receiving.
Okay, I'm seeing it. I'm seeing
You
it.
seeing it? You're
Yeah,
seeing
I'm
it?
seeing it. I'm seeing it.
Okay. So these are the things that matter. And then I would say, okay, now come back to me in the space.
Okay.
What do you need to get up tomorrow and start doing?
Aha. So you're moving forward to create a backward process. So I am reverse engineering that future that I want for myself. So if I see that now and I see the awards and I see the people, then those are the things that I need to invest in today.
And if somebody's 75, do it for your 90th birthday.
Okay.
If you're breathing, there's nothing but possibility from now until you're not.
But okay, so that's great.
Go.
I'm gonna slightly push back. That's great
Yeah.
from like a sensory perspective, right? Like from
Mhm.
like a perspective of thought. And I'm a big believer in the power of manifestation, right? Like so I see something but what about a practical sense, right? So I'm overworked, I got 2 kids, I got a full-time job. I still
Mhm.
want to create candles because that was really what I wanted to do.
So my thing is
What
like,
am I actually doing to create space? What am I doing? What's my mindset in that on a day-to-day basis to ensure that I am doing the activities necessary for me to actually get there?
well, I just gave you step one, which is like knowing what you actually want. So,
Yes,
right? Like we can't do space and grace if we don't even know what we want. So that's
100%,
step one.
100%.
Then it's like everybody's got more time than we really say we have. Because you were scrolling on something, you were talking to someone on the phone and listening to somebody's problems you don't want to be. Everybody is spending some amount of time engaging in some amount of nonsense that does not serve them and who they want to be. I don't care if it's 5 minutes. See, if you sit on the toilet and you bring your phone and you scroll, whatever you scroll, sit on the toilet and bring your pen and your paper and write some ideas down. I
So
gave you
wait,
space.
because I think that this is um, a conversation around immediate gratification and what ultimately makes us happy. Because I think sometimes immediate gratification is conflated with happiness, right? So it's like, I need a break. I want to get on Instagram. And being on Instagram in this moment is going to make me happy. But ultimately, if I want to produce candles, that may produce a greater satisfaction, but it has a longer tail in order to manifest. So I may delay doing the activities to create a candle because Instagram gives me the serotonin, the happiness, the all that stuff that I need right now. So what you're suggesting is that we make space not for the things that distract us in the moment, but invest in the things that will create sustainability and happiness long term.
Well, like, and you just said the thing, right? Distract in the moment. Like Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, blah, 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 Twitter, Pinterest, whatever the thing is you're doing, has just become like crack, booze, whatever the thing is for people, right? It's just a numbing device to separate us from ourselves in a lot of ways. So with a lot of clients, I have a lot of creative clients. I'm like, okay, sweet. So how much time did you spend scrolling last week? And they're like, and so I'll be like, your homework for the next 2 weeks is you get 10 minutes. That's it. You use it however you want. You can use 45 seconds a day. You can use 10 minutes all at once, but that's all you get.
But
And then I
wait, no, T. I just want to rock. There's so many TikTok dances out there that 10 minutes doesn't allow for me to get the motions in. Like, what am I doing?
Okay, my question is like, so you didn't have it in your body to have your own dance? If you weren't learning somebody else's TikTok dance, what dance is living within you that wants to come forth?
Okay, great point. And no, great point. Because I think that I recently had a conversation with someone who is super creative, but but social media as a whole is their litmus test for how impactful their art is. And because they don't get a lot of likes and follows, they have acquiesced what they want to produce in order to do whatever is popular, hoping that joining into the popularity of what's interesting on social media will attract attention to them so that they ultimately will produce the art that they want to produce and then get a following. But I find that to be slightly, not fully, but slightly counterintuitive in a way that if people like you for a TikTok dance and your art is actually spoken word, then you may be investing in something that doesn't actually get you the results that you're looking for, because you're tricking people in essence by joining in on something that you're not authentically interested in producing as a form of creativity.
As I literally sit over here fighting back tears hearing that. This is like my pain point. One of my biggest pain points, because there's so many powerfully amazing, beautiful, creative people out there, and artists, like true artists out there, right? Who have the power to make people feel and see and experience, whose feels like there's no place for their voice. And it takes a lot to say, I'm in charge of my life. I am the authority and the head of my world. And no matter what, I'm not going to shake off of that. And I am just going to keep giving the world the thing and trust that I will be taken care of. It sounds like insanity to most people, but what happens is, like, I'm a coach who has no social media. I have a LinkedIn profile, but like, I'm not on social media. And people are always like, what? How are you actually doing that work? And I'm like,
wait, side note, you're it's not just that you're not on social media. You're also producing from a slightly remote place in the world. So it's not like you're just running into people on a daily basis and you're like, I don't need social media. I have all these people that I see on a regular basis all the time. Like, I don't share this with the audience. Like, it's not just that you're not on social media. You're also producing from this space that allows you to kind of tap into yourself and to nature and to the world in a very kind of authentic, raw way.
yeah, so I'm a nomad. So I've been on like basically farm this year, a remote place in the French Alps that literally barely had internet. I was like on a hotspot the whole time. And I'm currently on a Scottish island. Not the most remote Scottish island I spent time on, but like not like it's an island. Like if it's after 8 p.m., you can't get off it.
It's not Manhattan. It's not like you're on an island, but the island is just filled with all these people that you're just talking to and chilling with. So you could be like, social media, I'm fine. Like you're really in the world, experiencing the world while simultaneously building out your own business and connecting with creatives.
Hmm.
with intent, right? Because like social media is just about exposure, while what you're describing feels like it's more about intentionality and just being intentional about how you're engaging with folks.
So like everything for me is intention, intention, intention. And like even like this conversation, right, with like how we met and everything, like I am always like very intentional about like who I'm speaking to, why am I speaking to them, what do I have to offer them, and what am I looking to get back? And when we first had our first chat, I was just like, this seems like a fun dude who's not somebody in my like world who I would normally get to talk to. Maybe his audience will like me, but also we might just have a fun chat and that'll be random and a good story.
Yep.
Um, and I was like, and hopefully my offering to the people he's aligned with and that are already in his world, my offering will be a little bit of like permission to stake that claim and to decide like today, now, this moment, whenever you hear this, it's evergreen, can be the start of your life.
That was powerful. I think that's powerful, right? Because that speaks so much to what isn't really said about the positive contribution of social, of streaming, of digital, is that it is evergreen, and that it's not just about fights and about dressing and about cosmetic applications and all that, which is great, right? Because there's space for it all. Like there's no judgment on what inspires or what is content that is valuable, right? Like there's like people are experiencing things and their experiences are worthy of being shared. But I think that there is this sort of misunderstanding that um that so much of what comes out of streaming is really just meant to be consumed like fast food. Like it's just there, and you look at it and you like it or you don't like it and you move on. And then, to your point of your message, is you come across something and it resonates with you and it sticks with you and it informs future decision making. And that's why I do this. This is why I've heard now that you do this, right? And it's to hopefully give people space and permission and and comfort in knowing that there is no one way, there is no right answers. There's just experience and journey, and you go along with it, and you make the choices that you make, and you become the summary of those things. And at any given point, you want to do something else, like be a creative. Do
Do
it.
it. Yeah.
Do it.
The only thing is your truth. Like that's the only thing.
Yeah.
And the more you get in touch with that, own it, claim it. And once you really claim your truth, you can then proclaim it and shout it from the mountaintops. The more you do that, the more space you have to hold to share, to be generous, to be kind, to be loving, to practice grace. But when we're all fighting for a sense to be seen and understood, because we aren't really wholly sure of who we are or what we want, how do you hold space and arrive with compassion and a place of letting other people be who they are?
So to bring this to a full circle, right? Like the way that we can engage our genius,
Mm,
our inner child, our inner creative, is to understand that the journey is not cemented, that it's not, that there's not just one path, that we can deviate, we can explore, we can be curious. And in that, that point of curiosity, that point of exploration is inherently what we're experiencing when we were creating genius stuff. We were just out there going, that seems nice, that seems nice, that seems fun, that seems bad, right? And making these sort of instinctual choices around what we're doing, and we're letting that instinct inform our decisions. And if we're able to do that in a healthy way that doesn't create chaos and harm in our lives, then we can use that and fuel that to empower us to produce and create the things that we ultimately want to do.
Yeah, like reconnect to that internal voice, that internal imaginary friend. When you could see all the extras, when matter wasn't informed by somebody else's idea of what it was. Just think of that outfit you put on at 3 that you knew was the greatest outfit ever, you
Yeah.
know? Um,
And it had nothing to do with advertisement, with social media. It had nothing to do with opinions. It was just birthed by your own sense of greatness, of your own sense of excellence, of your own sense of like joy. And that thing was joyous. Then no one could tell you different. And you had uh, uh, a defense for it that was unshakable because you knew in your soul that that was who you were in that moment.
I am a superhero princess that wears a cape and carries a wand, and you can, and in pajamas all day, every day, and wellies, and that is my truth.
Yeah.
And what if we allowed, what would the world be like if people were allowed to follow their truth? I don't think any little baby has come into the world being like, I want to cause harm. That is not how like it works, right? But we start like fighting and harming and each other and swording because someone says, "Oh no, you can't go outside looking like that. Oh no, you have to do this. You're not going to have that." So yeah, my thing is to say reconnect to your sense of play and play full out.
Yeah. And I think what's amazing about what you said earlier is that we also then have to surround ourselves with community that loves us and uplifts us for that, right? That's not tearing us down and detracting from that, and putting their trauma onto us about why that is acceptable or not acceptable, or valuable or not valuable, because um, we are human, and we do want community. We do want acceptance. And so if that's not in your community makeup right now, then like an artist that is going to change direction, you need to find new community. And if you can't figure it out, find yourself a genius advocate, a genius connector, a genius marketing manager for your life who will be like, I'm going to introduce you to some folks that think that what you're doing is awesome, that are doing things that feel like what you're doing, and build community that way. If you can't find it, there's somebody in your life that can.
And like what you just said is so real. And I'm sure people have heard that saying there's a lid for every pot. But even across the world, most pots come in standard sizes. So just think about how many lids will actually fit you. Hold out for your lids. Don't take an ill-fitting lid, right? Burns, boilovers, all the things. And there's going to be several lids that are just waiting to pop in, but you have to create the space for them by getting rid of like those mismatched socks and ill-fitting lids.
And this is coming from a nomad. So she's been around a couple lids in her life. So she's seen the gamut of lids that's available and found her space amongst the lids. All right. So, Keaton-Woods, I have two questions for you. It's two questions I ask everyone on Man versus Brand. By the way, guys, she referenced this slightly, but this is our second talk. No, this is our third talk. We did a pre-interview one. Then we did a taping. Technical difficulties, no worries. She was kind enough to come back So she has done this, but in fact, her response may change because now she sort of understands the line of questioning. She's had a little bit of prepping, but that's okay because as a world traveler, as someone who's been informed by so much life, she's going to have a spectrum of answers. So I highly doubt that I'm going to hear the answer that I heard the last time. Or maybe I do. That's okay too, right? Sometimes consistency works. Okay, so on any streaming platform and or YouTube and or audiobook, whatever you're consuming, what's something that you have recently engaged in that you thoroughly enjoy?
So I had not been engaging in this for a really long time. And so when we spoke previously, you asked me that, and I was like, I know what I need to resurface. And as I'm coming to the end of my work year, actually, right when we wrap up this call,
Yep.
I'm going to listen to some more of this before I go to bed. So the Poetry Unbound podcast.
Okay.
Oh.
Okay. I'm interested. I'm intrigued.
So you're a writer, you'll love this. And it's got yeah, I'm getting there. It's gonna change your life. Poetry Unbound podcast. It's got find it, listen.
I will. I will. I will. Then I'll make sure to have the link in the show notes so everyone else can find it too. All right.
Yeah.
So, second question. Any streaming platform, podcast, anything that you're consuming and engaged in, what's something that you thoroughly enjoy that people may not necessarily associate with you? Like, what's that thing that you enjoy that maybe folks in your life, whether it's in the French Alps, Scottish Isle, and or home with family, they may not be like, she loves that, but you actually do.
Okay. So this is not something that's streaming.
Okay.
It is an app.
Okay. I'm with it. I'm with it.
It's called Aurora.
Okay.
And it's literally an app that will tell you your likelihood from the place that you're standing of seeing Aurora Borealis or the best place for sighting of it. And you can turn it on to give you notifications for your location or where you would need to go. And it gives percentages. And so it's the winter. And so now this is my daily thing about like, oh, do I need to go to Saskatchewan so I can see auroras? So,
okay. So wait, side note. Someone shared with me an app. I can't remember the name, so I'm not going to do it, but maybe I will and put it in the show notes. Of an app that gives you your position to all of the multiple constellations in the sky. And so you can stand and it'll say like, turn around and that's the Big Dipper. Turn around and so it gives you proximity of anywhere you are in the world to all the known constellations in the universe. And so I feel like between those two apps, that's like really cool experiential stuff that you don't really need a lot of people for. You're just like, oh, that way. I'm going to go that way for a little bit and check it
could
out.
you share the constellation app with me? I need that in my life.
I sure will. I will follow up this talk with the constellation app. I'll definitely find out. Yeah. Aurora. All right, cool. Awesome. Well, listen, why don't you tell folks if they're interested? We know that you're not really social media, but you are on LinkedIn and you do have a website. So talk to folks about how they can engage in the content that you're producing and or talk to you if they want some coaching.
In general, I like to also have chats with random people, so feel free to reach out. Like you said, I'm on LinkedIn at Keaton-Woods. T-Hive also has a page, but the T-Hive.com, and I also do writing on the Chronicle, so sort of some blogging, holding space for my talks and pod appearances and all kinds of other jazz there, as well as contact me if you want to find out even more about coaching. A lot of times I'm not the right coach for people, but I know a ton of coaches. So if you're like, what does coaching even mean? I love having that conversation with people too. So
yeah, listen, discovery is such an awesome part of the coaching process. Sometimes you realize like, I'm not the right person for you, but here are some insights that I have on what you're experiencing right now, and let me get
Yeah.
you to someone who is trustworthy to help you through this part of the process.
Yep.
All right,
And
cool.
yeah, I started a new thing also this month where I'm featuring another coach I know a month. And so I've got all kinds of coaches, podcast coaches, all the things. So I
All
feature another
right.
coach that has like a specialty that's not mine. So
Okay. So listen, guys, if you are a creative or possibly not a creative, maybe you don't identify as creative, right? We are now in the world of identification. You may not identify as creative, but you may in fact be. And you have divorced yourself of that part of your life, that part of your existence, that part of your identity, and you are interested in re-engaging who that person is. If so, if you are creative, if you formerly identified as creative, if you have never identified as creative, if you are the parent, friend, loved one of a creative, then Keaton-Woods and the Hive is somewhere to start. A person who will give you permission to find yourself, to find safe space, to find community, to articulate passion, to just be the person that you want to be, right? Because the beauty of all of this conversation is you may choose not to be genius in painting anymore. You may choose to be genius in mathematics, and that's an art of its own. You may be genius in science. You may be genius in logistics, but you may just need a person to say, hey, that's okay. That's awesome. That's beautiful. And so if you want that sort of affirmation, that sort of love, that sort of support, then I would recommend checking out the T Hive. I would recommend talking to Keaton-Woods. And I would say continue listening to the Man versus Brand podcast. Thank you guys for joining us on this episode. If you like it, please share it. Please subscribe. If you can, let other folks know about what we're doing over here, because I'm really passionate about it. And I have amazing guests like T, who are also passionate about it. Thank you guys so much. Love you all. Bye.